So good morning. I will continue with whatever we have been discussing from yesterday. Yesterday I showed you different observational uh, properties which led us to believe or led us to understand that there are material in between stars in our galaxy, and we call them as interstellar medium. And we said that this material, since we use different probes, we figured out that the gas which is present between stars is everywhere, but it is not uniformly distributed. Rather, it is some form of clumps. And also, you see that in a given region, the gas has all sorts of exist in all sorts of ionization states. I showed examples of neutral gas, singly ionized and doubly ionized gas. Not only that, in some regions, we also have other extreme, the molecular gas, where you see that several atoms join together and form molecules. We also discuss about the interesting fact that the interstellar medium being such a low density region, how it can have heavier elements, and we have to somehow connect the heavier elements which are created typically in nuclear reaction in the central regions of stars with the region between the stars, right, the interstellar medium. We spent some time in the end of the lecture to see that if you look at the chemical composition, they are very different compared to what one sees in stars. But the chemical composition also depends on where you measure them. It seems that when you measure it in a very cold region, the properties are different compared to measuring them in a hotter region. So then we looked at some possibilities to connect that with condensation temperature. Then we have some sort of understanding that it is possible that some of the missing heavier elements in gaseous form could be in a solid or liquid form, and which we can detect in the kind of effects they can produce on the spectrum. We showed some example of a region where we have uh, no star visible in optical, but when you go to infrared, you see some of them. We call extinction. We also found scattering, regions with scattering, and also we found regions where these solid state particles producing what we call as diffuse interstellar band. So till now we have some idea, till now we have developed some idea that interstellar medium spectroscopy gives us some understanding of what is there in this medium. Somehow now we should understand how this is linked with stars itself. Okay, I will try to do it now. So the first thing one understand. So you remember yesterday I showed you molecular content and hydrogen content are correlated. When you have large amount of hydrogen atoms present in a region, the region also shows large amount of molecular gas. The same thing one can try with the dust. For example, eb minus v is a quantity which you can use to quantify how much the gas is reddened, how much the starlight is reddened. Sorry. So basically, if this value is very large, 0.4 or zero point 0.5, you mean that this star is highly reddened. That means there is huge amount of uh, dust scattering material between this object and us. So what is plotted in this, it's interesting plot. What is plotted here is basically the amount of hydrogen atom in the y-axis and the amount of reddening measured in the x-axis. And it is clear that beyond some value of hydrogen atom 2 into 10 to the 20 or something, you see that there is large amount of dust. That means there is a correlation between amount of dust and amount of gas. It's interesting. We were saying that there is a correlation between amount of gas and amount of molecular gas, atomic and molecular gas. And here you are saying that when the gas content is very large, it also tend to produce more reddening. So it's clear that there are linkages between amount of gas available in a region with amount of molecular gas one can produce, and also it seems to be related to amount of whatever you call dust extinction, dust particles you can produce in the region. So somehow there is a link between dust particle, atomic gas, and molecular gas. Okay, so that is what this figure is saying, and in fact, it is very interesting. In our galaxy, there is a distinct cutoff around 210 to the 20. Whether you count only hydrogen atom or you count hydrogen and molecular hydrogen, you find that beyond that value, you tend to have more dust and and as per our earlier discussion, more molecule. So we have few things to link. One is that how do you get metals in the diffuse medium? Second thing is that when you get metals in the diffuse medium, it seems that you can form molecules by mixing them, by joining them. But it seems that there are some correlations seen here. You have to somehow link this correlation to get a bigger picture. So let's try to go through this. The same thing, whatever I showed here is plotted in a different unit. Instead of plotting them in hydrogen, a number of hydrogen atoms, you can plot them fraction of hydrogen in the molecular form, like what I showed yesterday, 2F NH2 divided by NH1 plus 2 NH2. If you do that, same thing you can see, because the large extinction occur when the molecular hydrogen column density is high here, or when the molecular fraction is higher here. So take home from these four plots is that when you have more amount of gas somewhere, and you also tend to have them in molecular form, as well as they tend to produce a lot more reddening. So this is just a broad correlation one sees. Of course, you can also see them in the spatial correlation. Till now, what we are plotting is that we measure some quantity and just plotted one versus another and try to see like whether there is any relationship between them. You can also do the same thing. These are nice pictures taken from space. That's why they are exceptionally good. And what is shown in color-coded form, the black and reddish color, are extinction maps. Or you can think of like these are the regions where you see, these are like kind of pillars, like what we saw. This is like regions where there is enough amount of dust. These are dust pillars, dust and molecular gas. And you also look at UV images superimposed, where you can see young stars, like all these embedded dots are newly born stars. And one finds that there is a strong relationship in our galaxy. Whenever you look at the locations where the new stars, young bright, UV bright young stars, where they are, you will find that they are related to such regions. So that means young stars, it is observationally now one can prove with space telescopes in combination of combining UV, optical, infrared. You can show that young stars are embedded in dense molecular clouds. So it's very interesting that there is a connection between molecular clouds and stars. And usually you don't see very young stars in a region where there are no molecular gas. Okay, so that is the first hint. So the way we have now picturized the whole thing is the following. We think that to form stars, basically, what is a star? Star is nothing but a gas, self-gravitating gas, but it is prevented from collapsing to a point by the pressure created from the nuclear reaction which is going in the center. This is what is known as hydrostatic equilibrium. Every layer of the star experiences two forces: gravity, which is pulls in, any pressure gradient which try to push it outside, so that there is a stability being reached. And continuously the energy required to maintain the stability, or energy, pressure, whatever momentum, all are generated from inside, right? In the sense the nuclear reaction provides basic ingredient to keep the gas at some pressure, and gravity supports the gas from expanding out. So you can look at it in both ways. So the stability of a star is maintained by the equilibrium between self-gravity and the pressure induced by pressure gradients induced by nuclear reaction in the central region. So the first thing you have to do is that, suppose, how do I want to form a star? I will start with a bunch of gas particle. I have to bring them closer to, so that is easy for me to bring them closer to each other, because self-gravity will do it for me. As long as the gas is sort of, there has less pressure, the thing is try to get into the central region. So when this occurs, the pressure will build up because you are compressing the gas into the small region. Somehow you radiate away this extra energy, which has been energy which has been provided by this compressing gas. The gas can keep on compressing because the gravity will try to bring everything to a point. I mean, this is how you form stars. So it is good to have a cold gas so that you can compress them, and cold gas with several channels of cooling, so that you can compress them to a very small and very dense region so that nuclear reaction can start. So this physics-wise, we understand now why there is a connection between molecular cloud and stars, because molecular clouds are basically the place from which stars form. So this is a first hint. If you think that molecular gas is part of interstellar medium, you can think of like there are special regions in interstellar medium which are sites for forming stars. Okay, so this is the first connection. So stars are nothing but initially interstellar medium at some stage. When they go through gravitational instability, if they are in a correct parameter space, they will end up with stars. Okay, that is first connection we can establish from looking at this. The second relation is even more interesting. Suppose you look at the stars, overall picture is correct, right? You look at embedded stars in a molecular gas and you see them, there can be a relationship between them. Suppose if you go close and zoom in into one of those stars and see what happens, and it's very interesting when you zoom in into one of the stars and use different filters, you find the radiation is much more spread compared to the star itself. So for example, if you put H alpha filter, which is related to emission coming from hydrogen atom, you find that it is much more diffuse and it is much more extended compared to a single starlight, which you will see in if you take a snapshot of optical spectrum, right? So it's clear that the atomic gas, which is radiating away around a star, is spread over a lot more region. The other way of looking at it is that whenever I embed a star into a medium, it will induce some kind of radiative transport, and which leads to some sort of radiative process which emits radiation. There are two radiative processes which are important here. One is the hydrogen recombination, which will create a diffused lines of Balmer or Lyman series transitions. And the other one is done with Spitzer. Spitzer is an infrared telescope. The same region you look at it, you also see a diffuse infrared emission, which you believe that it is to do with the dust. Okay, so it's clear that even though you are embedded in a region, whatever you call you embedded in a molecular region, stars are embedded in a molecular region. If you go to the immediate vicinity of the stars, you find that there are atomic gas, not only atomic gas, ionized atomic gas and dust particles which are present. So this is very interesting. That means around each star, you will have some sort of sphere of influence of the star, which will keep the gas at an elevated ionization state compared to the rest of the molecular cloud. So the picture we have to imagine now is that whenever you have interstellar medium with dense molecular cloud, here are the sites of forming stars. Once the stars are formed, we notice that the radiation from these stars are influencing the surrounding medium. You can see them in various forms, because radiation can do two things to an atom. First thing is that it removes the electrons from the atom. So suppose you need some energy E is required to remove. If a photon which is doing this has an energy E prime, then E prime minus E will be the kinetic energy of the electron which is coming out of this atom. And this energy actually goes into the gas. So that means the gas will get heated up. There are two things happens when photon interacts with the gas, at least two things. Two important things. There are many more which we will not deal with it, but two important things is, one is that the gas gets ionized. Second thing is that gas gets heated to the higher temperature. So you can think of like this reaction, like atom is like a transducer which gets the energy from the photon and make it into the kinetic energy of the gas. So it's interesting physics. So the surrounding region of each star, after the star is formed, it influences the surrounding region through its radiative interaction. That is one of the interaction one can see. Since the gas is at higher temperature and free electrons are also available because ionization is there, you can also see them in radio emission, right? You can see them in thermal Bremsstrahlung in radio, and people have seen radio emission from these kind of so-called what we call as H2 regions. H2 region is the ionized hydrogen around the gas. So this is the second thing we learned. The third thing, which is very interesting, again, if you go in depth, I showed you molecular gas is present, heavy ion molecular gas are present. If you actually map them, you find something very interesting. You have stars. If you have star or star cluster, you see the surrounding region will be atomic gas ionized, but then immediately, since these are all big molecular gas and you are looking at a zoomed in region, you will find that around the stars, you will have some sort of an interface within which it will be either ionized atom or neutral atomic gas will be present, only beyond which you will find that molecular gas can be present. It's a bit like saying that you want to be in a safer distance. If the molecular gas goes close to the star, stellar radiation can actually rip off the molecular gas itself. So it's very nice picture we can imagine. You have a molecular cloud from which stars form. When stars form, that's the stars influencing the surrounding region with radiation. But this region also, what it does is that it prevents it removes some radiation out. So as you go deeper and deeper, the influence of the star will become lesser and lesser. That means beyond some radius, even though star is present, the stellar radiation cannot produce any radiatively important transitions in the surrounding region. So these are known as the region which is influenced by star is known as photo dissociation regions, because photons can dissociate atoms in these regions. Okay, so now we visualize each star is influencing the surrounding you through radiation. This is the first thing we have learned. So stars are formed from molecular clouds. They interact with molecular cloud radiatively. So they scoop up some region where no molecular cloud will be present. Once it is formed, it scoops up some region. That's the picture we keep. And these are known as photo dissociation region. There are fantastic amount of physics one can do in these regions. So I'm not going into the details of that, right? But you understand this physics has to do with how photon interacts with molecules and how photon different energies interact with molecules. It's very interesting aspect to look at. So now this is the picture we are going to have in a very symmetric way. What are we going to see around a star? We have a star followed by this H2 region, means I'm just looking at hydrogen, which you can extrapolate to any molecule of interest. This is something like an onion structure in a what you call in a theoretized simplified picture, where you have a spherical H2 region around, means like ionized hydrogen region around this. But then what happens is that the amount of photons you need to keep this, when the number of photons created per unit time in star is equal to the number of photons required to keep this whole region in an ionized form, because every time the recombination occurs, you have to remove this photon out, this electron out. That if these two are equal, you will find that you can maintain some volume of gas completely ionized, and this is what is known as H2 region. Here the condition is number of hydrogen ionizing photon created per unit time from this star equal to total number of recombinations per time occurring within this sphere of radius, whatever you can call as Strömgren sphere, right? So a radius of this region. So beyond which what happens is that even though the star produces hydrogen, no hydrogen ionizing photon can go to this region. So this region will remain atomic hydrogen. But there are photons with lower energy which will prevent this atomic hydrogen from actually getting into a molecular form, because molecular hydrogen formation requires energy which is between something like dissociation energies of the order of 10 electron volts. It's between 6 to 10 electron volts. So that is what it is. So there are enough photons, even though they cannot ionize hydrogen, the hydrogen ionizing photons are stopped. Slightly low energy photons still penetrate through them up to some radius. Again, you can apply the same thing, like how much a photon I need to prevent it from becoming molecule. When that number per unit time is equal to the number per unit time of such photons produced by the star, you will find that you cannot go beyond this, right? You will stop all this photon up to some radius. So beyond which what happens, if you form molecular hydrogen, there is not enough photon to come and destroy this molecular hydrogen, because they are stopped by the regions which are inside. So you can see that you can actually visualize some kind of structures where ionized gas, neutral gas, molecular gas. The further the gas is, the gas inside shields the photon which can destroy those gas particles, right? The energy required to destroy these particles are much less, but the photons are not allowed to reach there by the material which is inside. This is what is known as shell-shielded regions, which are regions which are shielded, region which is shielding the inner part of the region. So this is the picture you will see around each star. So this is the first influence of star on the surrounding medium, which means that now if you go back to my first point, I said that you start from molecular gas, you just collapse it to a smaller region, collapse it, as long as it cools, you will be having a possibility that it can become very dense and it can trigger nuclear reactions, so that it can become stars. So clearly, if you take any gas which is very close to the star, I'm doing one star, usually stars are formed in clusters. If you take gas around the clusters, you notice that the radiation will keep them at elevated temperature because it is interacting with the gas. That means once there is a star, the surrounding region will find it difficult to form subsequent stars till the star dies. Okay, you get this point. So this is what is known as feedback. One of the feedback is that stars form interacting with surrounding region. and they will not let any further formation of star very easily. Then you may form it due to some other process, but we are doing it in a very simple picture, right? We don't complicate the scenarios. The next kind of interaction a star can have with the interstellar medium is what is known as winds. Winds means basically material from the star actually comes out and into the interstellar medium. We hear about the stellar wind, space weather, solar wind, space weather, and this and that. There are different events one can have. One is known as steady wind, means that continuously the material is being lost by the star. That means the outer part of the star can keep on coming out. And there are some examples like solar wind, Wolf-Rayet stars, or you can say planetary nebulae. All this means that the outer part is basically outer part of the star, material of the star can just go into the interstellar medium. This is one of the very interesting things. That means there is a linkage. Like we have been talking about, is there any linkage between the source of metals where the nuclear reaction takes place and the low density region? This is one possibility. Means like materials which are in the stars can actually come to the outer regions, okay, into the interstellar medium. So wind is very important. This is another kind of feedback. Feedback means like first time is a radiation come and interact with the surrounding medium. Here, material which you form as a star, which is going to produce wind. Of course, it is easy for you to visualize. Wind means I am going to throw some amount of material from star to outside, which means that at that point of time, I'm going to violate what we are calling as hydrostatic equilibrium. If there is equilibrium, there will be no mass outflow or inflow. The fact that it is there, some amount of violation might have happened in the surface of the star itself. Of course, there is the most violent thing one can think of is what is known as supernovae. You would have heard it by now. The supernovae are very interesting because the whole star is now gone, right? Meaning quite a bit of star, not whole star, quite a bit of star, which now that material is thrown with a high speed into the interstellar medium. I think this is very interesting. What is the difference between the material which was there in the beginning? So when you form the star, you form a star with material whatever is available to you. If interstellar medium has some material, only hydrogen, you will form a star only with hydrogen. But during the lifetime of the star, it builds up all the elements, right? Because nuclear reaction continues in the center. Elements are built up in the center. It is not necessary that these elements would have come to the outer surface and would have been driven out like winds. It is very most unlikely. But when this kind of supernova explosion occurred, all the elements you have created is now thrown into the interstellar medium. So you can envisage a situation. You start with interstellar medium around a star, which has pure hydrogen and helium. Then somehow you form a star. When it went through supernova, that surrounding medium now will have what? You could have hydrogen, helium because it's already there. You would have put carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, magnesium, sulfur, silicon, all from the stars. So now, actually, if you think a bit, you have a scenario where you can understand whatever I have been asking before, okay? So before going that, we can also ask this very simple question. You say that whenever you form stars in our galaxy, we don't form stars of a same mass. Some stars will be very massive. Some stars will be like our sun. Some stars can be 100 times, have 100 times mass of our sun. And it is also well known, higher the mass, the lifetime is smaller. In the sense that if you take a very massive star, the stellar evolution model suggests that it cannot live longer. Okay, whereas a low mass star can live much longer. Okay, this is the first thing we all understood from when you do the stellar whatever stellar evolution models. But now you can also ask the question. It has been already told to you. When you look at sun, you look at lines, which absorption lines produced by the photosphere of the sun. Okay, and it is well known nuclear reaction is going in the center of the sun. It is most likely that elements which are created by ongoing nuclear reactions, usually they are confined to the very central regions or slightly outside. They cannot come from center to the photosphere. So if it is happening, that means large amount of churning is happening. That destabilizes the hydrostatic equilibrium very much, right? So it is well documented now that whenever you look at the photosphere, the composition you measure in the photosphere is related to what is the composition from which the star is formed. Because any element you created, it has not yet reached the surface. So one can actually ask, how was my interstellar medium evolving as a function of time? You can take oldest star. If you take oldest star, you can detect in our galaxy, you will find that it would have formed from the composition of the interstellar medium much, much longer back. You take the youngest star today and you look at the photospheric composition, that will tell what is the interstellar medium 10 to the 6 years back. Okay, you take a 10 to the 6-year-old star, the photosphere will tell you what is the composition of interstellar medium 10 to the 6 years back. If you take a 10 to the 9-year-old star, it will give you the composition of interstellar medium 10 to the 9 years back. Okay, so it's very interesting. That's what is known as age metallicity kind of plot. What is measured is the amount of hydrogen, amount of iron versus hydrogen plotted against the age of the star. That means if you pick a star here, it tells you about how the interstellar medium was 1.2 log is at 10 gigayears back, right? It's 1 will 10. It is in the logarithmic unit. So clearly, there is a correlation. This anti-correlation. This basically tells you that as I pick the younger star, the amount of iron I am finding in the star is much higher compared to what I would have found from a low mass stars. Okay, this is very, very interesting that stars tell you something about what happens to the interstellar medium. They tell you that in the beginning interstellar medium had more hydrogen compared to iron. As time progressed, amount of iron in this interstellar medium is built up. Okay, how do you build up? Of course, we know that iron is created in not in this kind of supernova. Iron is created in type 2 supernovae. That means there are several type 2 supernovae would have gone in our galaxy, which has kept on increasing the iron content in the interstellar medium. So when I form the next star, I will take gas from there. It will have more iron compared to that. I guess that this is very powerful way of quantifying the chemical evolution occurring in our galaxy itself. Okay, so this is sort of so I'm giving this lecture in such a way that you get a feel of how astronomy is progressed. I don't want to bulldoze you with equations without getting the context. You see, we have no idea of dimensions here. We have no idea of distances. We have no idea of time. We cannot go and change anything. We have built a story now. We are building a story based on what is observed and try to have a consistency between various aspects of it. I'm simplifying it, but this has been done rigorously, exactly like the way I'm trying to build the story here. So now, yesterday we talked about how to probe interstellar medium. Today we are finding the connection between interstellar medium and star. Of course, we can simply see our galaxy picture. This is the picture taken of our galaxy, Milky Way, in different wavebands, and emission is seen in radio, molecular, gas, infrared, dust emission, optical, gamma rays. That means this is basically the picture you see comes from live objects like stars plus any emission coming from the gas and dust. So it's clear that our interstellar medium, or whatever you call the galaxy itself, because a lot of mass is in the interstellar medium, considerable mass, it tells you that there is some sort of a continuously interacting region of interest to us. So let's go forward and let's build the story of whatever we have developed and try to understand how to build the. I have written down, but I'll explain to you in this detail. So you start with. So we usually start with a molecular cloud. So you start with a diffuse interstellar gas. We'll start from there. There is a diffuse interstellar gas which you detect through hydrogen emission and whatnot. If you set up some sort of cooling, this region gets condensed, and when it gets condensed and cold, it can convert this atomic gas into the molecular gas. If you set up nice gravitational collapse scenario where the gas can be compressed to much lower volume by efficiently continuously cooling, you will find that you can trigger nuclear reaction. That means starting from diffuse interstellar medium, a gravitational collapse followed by cooling can lead to stars. Okay, so the stars will live for some time. While they are living, they will generate nuclear reactions and produce heavier elements in the center. At some stage, this hydrostatic equilibrium will be violated, and they will sort of go into some sort of supernovae. When it supernovae occur, what happens is that when the star is alive, it interacts with the surrounding medium through radiation. That's why I said that radiation will influence the diffuse medium around the star. Now this cycle will be broken because it can no more cool because its radiation is continuously heating the gas. when it dies, when the star dies, it actually throws metals, whatever metals means heavier elements it has created, into the interstellar medium, and these heavier elements can actually get into whatever you call dust, meaning they can become molecules, dust, and all can be produced during this evolution of this medium. And another thing I have not mentioned, but you would have heard already, is that whenever there is a material, you try to push another material through this medium. This first material will resist the motion of this medium. That will lead to what is known as shocks. Shocks are basically the regions where you can create high temperature, high energy particle moving with high speeds, known as cosmic rays. Okay, so basically you see that stars does all sorts of things to start to this kind of whatever you call ecosystem. Okay, so it's clear now. You can go this way. You start with diffuse molecular star. It throws a lot of material. You go into diffuse. Again, you can go in this cycle. But the difference is that first time you will go with pure hydrogen. Second cycle will have little more heavier elements. This cycle, when the cycle runs for a lot more time, your heavier element will build up. And this is basic scenario of galaxy evolution, because this heavier element tells you what is the property of a galaxy. A galaxy evolution is controlled mainly by the star formation and the linkage of star formation with respect to the physics of the interstellar medium. Okay, so I think this is basically I covered this to some extent. Okay, now let's move on. And so I have put what are the basic questions one can ask. So this I have already explained in detail. I'll just leave it here. So let's just move on to the next scenario. This is basically related to probing the distant universe. Okay, can I do the same thing like this? For example, you can also say whatever was happening to star may be happening to a galaxy. In between galaxy, like interstellar medium between stars, you may have something known as intergalactic medium. Can one do that? Okay, so it's difficult for us to do this way, and there are two things which are important for us to realize. The first thing to realize is that if you look at a faraway object, you are not looking at that object as it is now. Actually, you are looking at it how it was some time back. That time back is decided by the light travel time between that object and us. Okay, that is what you have to remember. But the second thing is that universe is some sort of a 2D image. So if I find an object, I have no idea of what is the distance. Okay, so the object may look faint because it is a bright object at far away, or it is a faint object closer to me. I have no idea of distance. That is where this idea of cosmological redshifts become important. What is basically happening is that you know that every object seems to be redshifting. Photon from every object seems to be redshifting with respect to us, and the amount of redshift one experience is directly proportional to the distance. So I think this is basically cosmology. The way you can do it is very something interesting. So we can start with Doppler equation. You would have written down the lambda observed will be lambda rest plus 1 plus v by c, and v by c usually is called as redshift or blue shift or whatever. Basically, what we are doing is that z will be going as v by c or dr by dt in proportional time. Just saying c, you can write it like this. But you can also think of a distance as some sort of a, so you can say that distance my 1 meter and your 1 meter may be different, right? Because I can say that something is 1 meter with my own scale, and you can say something is 1 meter with your own scale. Your scale and my scale may be different. So your difference in the size can also come from the scale with which you are measuring. So basically what I'm saying, the radius can be, the distance can be written in terms of some scale multiplied by distance. So we call it as A into L. The change in distance, velocity, can happen either I differentiate dA by dt or dl by dt. So in our Earth, for example, if I'm measuring distances, our scales are all same. So usually we say that dl by dt is the velocity. Whereas if you are constructing cosmological kind of in the universe, if you are looking at objects at different distances, since the universe is expanding continuously, it is possible that your scale, a specific distance between 2 points may remain different depending upon what scale you are using. So you can quantify in a simple cosmological principle that without applying any force, 2 points should not be moving away from each other. and whatever apparently you see us moving away from each other is related to the expansion of the universe. So this is the way one can define. That's why your redshift, whenever you look at the Doppler shift, you can say that it is related to the scale factors, the rate at which the universe is expanding between the point of emission and me. Okay, so that is the simple thing one uses. Okay, this is an example here. If you look at a wavelength embedded in this grid, it does not change with respect to grid. So these are 2 points which has not changed, but the grid length has changed. So this is the idea of this thing. So Hubble measured these distances and now means these shifts, and we have a connection between amount of redshift one measures and what is the distance. Once you know the distance, you also know that how much time it takes for light to come to you. So you can measure how much was the time, age of the universe at that location. So that means you can actually age map. You can have some sort of time sequencing as you go out in time. So this is what basically one is thinking of cosmological model. So one thinks that in the beginning there was nothing, there was Big Bang, and from Big Bang universe was extremely hot and it started expanding out, so it starts cooling. The challenges in front of cosmologists is to actually create the whole universe, all the material you are seeing in the universe starting from the Big Bang, and in not only create material, you have to accumulate them into galaxies, clusters, and whatnot. So I will not go into that, but basically, if you have redshift measurements, or you will be able to go back in time and actually see how different elements of the cosmology is being built directly. So one way of doing this experiment is to use telescope to detect objects at very large distances. But we can, like what I have done for stars, we can also build a story of the universe itself. So basically you say that you expect some region to be filled with material, we'll call it as intergalactic medium. And wherever there are gravitational instabilities, it can bring in gas to small volumes. And if these gas clumps can actually self-gravitate, that means gravity allow some gravitational potential. Here it is not self-gravity. We will introduce things like dark matter and dark energy. But for our simple introductory level lecture, let's assume that there is a gravitational potential which is going to become deeper and deeper and going to compress this gas into smaller and smaller volume, so that fragmentations of this gas can lead to formation of stars. So if you form large amount of stars in interstellar medium, this can be what you call as galaxy. So you can actually think of galaxy being formation, whatever, we can't call it as hydrostatic equilibrium. We can say that self-gravitating regions in the space where you can actually condense the gas into smaller volumes and produce stars. So this is what is your galaxy. And analogically, you can see that intergalactic medium may be the source. Wherever you find intergalactic medium with sufficient gravitational potential available, with efficient cooling possible, you will see that they can become galaxies. Okay. It is now well established, and you would have heard already in your lectures that galaxies also, like stars, they also have winds. Galaxies can throw a large amount of winds because of the presence of AGN in the center, or a supernova in the center, or when two galaxies merge, they can actually throw material into the intergalactic medium. Again, this material will be invisible to you because they are at low density, low temperature typically, so they cannot be seen. So, so you can think of probes like what we did in interstellar medium to see whether we can see them. So let's complete the cycle. You can start with some kind of material in the intergalactic medium, identify regions where gravitational collapse can occur, which can lead to star formation. And one of the reasons for star formation when stars die or do when the AGN is there, when two galaxies merge, you will be able to throw gas out of the interstellar medium into the intergalactic medium. Again, the same situation, intergalactic medium to start with will be only hydrogen and helium. If no gas comes out of the galaxy, intergalactic medium will remain to be in hydrogen and helium. But if you start seeing some heavier elements in the intergalactic medium, which means that the neighboring galaxies would have thrown chemically enriched material into this medium. Actually, this cycle is another important cycle one follows in the evolution of the universe. Okay, let me just move on. And is this a story or is it reality? Because this is a simulation done, and you can go from time sequencing, go from here. This is basically material dark matter distribution, you see it's more or less some clumps are there, but as time progresses, you see that most material at present day universe, most material get condensed into the central region. You can also ask what happened to the gas density. Gas density condensations, one can say. You can map the gas temperature. You can also look at what is the metallicity. In the beginning, metallicity was very low. As galaxies form and evolve, you see that metallicity in the intergalactic medium also becoming high. So this is basically this picture, whatever picture I have, this picture is what you have to have in your mind. Then you will start working out what is the requirement of escape velocities, how much gas can be lost, etc., etc. Okay. How does one probe uniquely in one way? I think this is one of the demonstrations, and you can see the movie, a photon from a distant quasar travels. As it travels, it picks up material between us and that in the form of absorption lines, and you can clearly see that this is Lyman alpha emission from quasar. These are gas clouds between us and the quasar. Since they are at different distances, the redshift they produce will be very different, and they produce this Lyman alpha absorption as the photon moves through. And here is the galaxy accidentally close to our line of sight. When the photon passes through this galaxy, it produces very strong absorption because there is a huge amount of hydrogen present. In addition to that, you found that there were some amount of elements, absorption lines, which are seen in this part of the spectrum. Till now, you don't have anything. You see, it's purely hydrogen absorption because this intergalactic space not polluted by metals, so you don't see them much. When the sight line goes through a galaxy here, you will see some absorption lines being created here, and these are related to basically metals which are present in this galaxy. You can just see now. Right. So you can also see what are these lines which you are seeing here. These are higher Lyman series absorption lines from. Okay, in principle, this is what is the exercise you do. You look at the distant quasar, gamma ray burst, or whatever. Since it is far away distance, the photon from that object will go through everything between us and that object, and they will produce absorption. You will be able to distinguish absorption produced by the pure intergalactic medium, absorption produced by a medium which is very close to the galaxy, and also if a galaxy tend to be exactly sitting on top of the quasar, in the sense that the sight line, then you will see the interstellar medium of the galaxy also. The basic goal of studying this exercise is to identify all these lines and map them where they are coming from. It's fortunately for us, the gas which is close to us will produce absorption shifted by less amount compared to the gas which is far away from us. The maximum shift will occur for the gas which is sitting in the quasar itself. So it is nice that because of this, it segregates absorption. Even though it is produced by the same atom at the same rest wavelength, you will segregate them in the velocity space because they are sequence of shifts which are proportional to the distance with respect to us. We can also identify, after you identify each cloud, you can go and ask whether there are any other absorption produced by the same cloud by looking at the tables, and we can map. In fact, we detect all sorts of material from this thing. So decoding this spectrum into evolution as a function of time is an interesting and challenging work, and which we are able to do now. Okay. So what have we achieved? We can achieve few things. This absorption could be related to three regions, right? One region is absorption related to the quasar itself. And you have been hearing about outflows in quasars, intrinsic 21 centimeter absorption and all till now. But you can also say that when you do optical spectroscopy, you are very much sensitive to whatever happens in the host galaxy of the quasar itself. Okay, you are sensitive to the accretion disk emission, the accretion disk ejection of gas from the accretion disk. You are sensitive to the region around the black holes. You are sensitive to the interstellar medium, and also you are sensitive to what is known as circumgalactic medium of the galaxy. These are known as intrinsic absorption lines. They typically have redshifts, absorption close to the redshift of the quasar, related to whatever I said. You are also sensitive to the intervening material, which is nothing but the cosmic web, which is evolving, like I showed in a picture. It's like regions where gas is present, and you have galaxies, filaments, and clusters, like what Shomak might have told you. All these structures are there. Your line of sight can go through any of them, and it picks gas. Extremely sensitive probe. It picks gas from, we are actually picking gas which is 10 to the minus 5 to 10 to the minus 7 particle per centimeter cube density. Okay, if you think about it, it is more than 7 to 10 orders of magnitude rarer than the best vacuum you can think of now in Earth. So this is the tool which we use, and what we have achieved I think we can ask lots of interesting questions, because these are atomic transitions. You can ask whether the physics governing the atomic transition is same everywhere in the universe. So why should the physical laws, because you say C equal to constant, why should that be valid in Earth only, right? We have checked the validity of constancy of light only in Earth. Have we checked this in space? Have we checked the mass of electron to ratio of mass of electron to proton in anywhere else? Why should it be the number which we think, right? You can also ask whether the coupling constant of different interactions are same or not. This we can do by looking at structure, wavelengths, and the wavelength splits between transitions by looking at these absorption lines produced in different parts of the universe. So it is very happy news that till now we have not found any violation of basic physics principles anywhere in the universe, whether close to a black hole or in a very rarer regions, or in at a time which is some sort of only few percent of the universe lifetime. We have not seen that. One thing we have clearly proved, that intergalactic space is highly ionized. Like interstellar medium also, intergalactic space is not completely neutral. It has a lot of ionized, and that is an interesting question. What keeps the universe ionized? This is what is known as reionization, and you would have heard from some talks, or you will be hearing. This is known as this is an interesting, challenging problem. Universe was hot in the beginning, then it cooled down because of expansion. But today's universe is relatively hot. Typical temperature is 10 to the 4 Kelvin outside typical galaxies. What keeps the gas at this temperature? This is an interesting and ongoing question, a research problem, which is also related to diffuse matter, right? So we have now mapped the evolution of go to different times in our universe. We can actually map, if I take a volume of the universe, what fraction of them are atomic, what fraction of them are molecule, how they are evolving as a function of time, starting from very early in our universe lifetime till today, right? And we are also able to map the same thing for heavier elements. So I told you about age metallicity relation for stars. We can also do the same thing for the universe itself by looking at how intergalactic medium at different times has a chemical composition which is varying with time. So one thing we learned also, galaxies are not like an isolated system. Galaxies continuously been accreting gas, the gas from intergalactic medium continuously falling into galaxies, and also they send enriched material into the intergalactic medium. This cycle is also there, exactly like the way we were thinking about stars. You have the same thing. How do you know? We can look at this gas in both emission and absorption, and look at the relative velocities by Doppler shifts, and these are all very much doable things which one can actually use to map the universe. Okay, I just give a flavor of what can be done and what is the basic idea behind. But these all require spectroscopy. Means what you are basically doing is that you take a starlight, and split the starlight into small wavelength chunks and measure how much photons at each wavelength. To do high precision science, you need to split as much as possible, so that you are beginning to look at the spectroscopic details at a level at which you are going to lift various degeneracies that may be present based on the instrumental properties themselves. Right? You want to go to the atomic physics and molecular physics, and not influenced by instrumental resolution. That means like we need bigger and bigger telescopes. So if you have collecting area, you will have a lot more photons to split and take spectrum at highest resolution. I think one of the things which may happen to us, and I put a slide some time back. So one of the things which India is involved is what is known as 30-meter telescope. And this is diameter is 30 meter, which is sometimes 3 times more diameter compared to whatever we have, biggest telescope we have at present. And India is one of the partner. We have about 10% time, and this will actually allow you to detect galaxies up to very large distances and study intergalactic medium as well as galactic properties at a much higher detail. Of course, complementary thing is what is known as SKA, Square Kilometer Array. You would have already heard about it, or you will be hearing about it. This will allow you to map the distribution of hydrogen and OH molecules up to very large distances. Again, this will be complementary to whatever one can do with optical telescopes. Of course, I just give an example of, we have been always talking about one quasar spectrum and studying gas in between. But imagine if you have several background sources are there, and if you take absorption, we can cross-correlate absorption between different sight lines and actually reconstruct the whole density field of the universe. Because our idea is to see what kind of gas distribution in the universe itself by looking at several background sources and mapping the gas at a given distance. This 3D mapping goes by the name IGM tomography, and this will be one of the hot topics which one will be pursuing with the next generation telescopes. And good news for all of you is that you will be at the right age at that time to actually exploit, because we will have time in 10% time in the world's best and biggest telescope at that time. So I think this is one of the things you have to keep your eye on for future, right? Okay, I just this is one more experiment, but I will just stop here. If you have any questions, I can take it. Thank you.
Can we identify the effect of electric and magnetic fields from the spectral?
Yes. So definitely magnetic field, yes, you can look at Zeeman splitting. At present, it is not well documented or demonstrated for cosmological distances, but at the nearby universe, Zeeman splitting is seen. Definitely with SKA and SKA precursors, if there are good regions with 21 centimeter line, we will be, or OH line, we will be able to probe the same thing. Yeah. Stark effect, I'm not sure. Electric field, how one is measuring. There was a proposal to do it with neon 8, highly ionized neon, being vulnerable to Stark effect, but I'm not aware of anything now, but definitely magnetic field one can map, no problem.
And we hear about this Rydberg atoms, right? Is that also part of the study? I mean, do you get to see Rydberg atom spectra?
Yeah, in the interstellar medium they do, but higher redshift I'm not aware of. Yeah, you mean that large N transitions, right?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. I think it is routinely done in the what we call it as radio recombination lines in the interstellar, because the signals become very weak. So local universe in our interstellar medium, it is done. Yeah.
Thank you.
I went slightly fast because I want to keep some time if in case you have any doubts or something is not clear, because in the offline you would have stopped me. Online it is not clear because I'm not seeing any one of your faces. I have no reaction. So
you can just unmute yourself and ask or put your hand up, whatever you like.
okay, if there are no questions, I will explain the last plot which I didn't explain. I thought like I'll keep 5 minutes for the discussion. I will also explain this, which is this is an interesting plot. This is the spectrum of a quasar. Basically, you see that this is wavelength, and the absorption line is seen. And whenever you find an absorption line, you believe as if there is a gas at some distance from you. Okay, and since it is, we have a feeling of apparent motion of this gas, you feel that this is shifted to this wavelength, right? But if you say universe is expanding, then what happens is that ideally, meaning like the distance between you and this object is going to keep on increasing, right? If this is increasing, one of the consequences you have to see is that the wavelength should be shifted. There should be an acceleration in the wavelength of these guys. So what happens is that if you actually believe in our Big Bang, all the absorption line you see today, if I go and observe after some time, they all should be shifted by some amount, which is proportional to what is the background cosmology in which you believe, right? Because if you take Big Bang with a particular Hubble constant and lambda CDM model, or you take lambda plus dark energy with different forms of dark energy, whatever, these models predict some amount of drift, means like the lines will not be in the same wavelength, their wavelength will keep changing. And the amount of drift one expect is very small. It's like you can see some few centimeter per second. centimeters per second in velocity scale, right? If you can, it's very difficult for us to reach such a scale, because you cannot split spectrum into smaller wavelength intervals. But if you wait sufficiently long, means like it's to get the acceleration, you have to integrate over you have to wait for more time, right? You are looking at what difference between, you are differentiating between two epochs which are separated by larger thing, then you will be able to do this. And now theoretically one has shown that if you look at a quasar today and take a high quality spectrum and go back and look at the same quasar, say after some time, right? After some time, that some time is of the order of 10 to 20 years or 30 years, it's possible for us to directly see whether our universe is expanding. That means like at each location, you expect the shift to occur by some amount, and all of them should be in one direction, because it's not like Doppler random motion, something towards you, something away from you. This is the expanding universe. So systematically you see lines are drifting away from you with some rate. And this experiment will be performed with the TMT when it is operational, with respect to some of the very high quality spectra we have already obtained with existing facilities. So that's all I wanted to say. If you have any question, you can ask me now. Or you can mail me something, because then I can respond to it. Because maybe I went too fast and you may need some time to digest. So it's fine.
So Sri Anand, the spectra on the right, it's a differential thing. That is what one looking for.
Yeah.
And it's a prediction, I believe.
Yeah. It's a prediction. Yeah. Prediction for different cosmological models. And,
I see.
And if it is purely matter-dominated universe, or purely matter without any dark energy, or matter with dark, these are the three models. Purely matter-dominated universe, it is easy to detect, but we know that is not the model which we would support. So it's going to be difficult to detect the so-called lambda CDM model today, but that's where the stability of the spectrograph will come in. If you reach whatever stability one is talking about, you will be able to detect it in 30 years span, monitoring about 100 quasars. If you observe 100 quasars and do the differential between their spectra obtained over 30 years time scale, you need two spectra for each object, but you have to wait for 30 years. I think this is not, the wait is not because of resources, it is because of the time lapse.
Yeah, so on this scale, where does this present sensitivity stand on the y-axis?
Present sensitivity is very poor. I think we are reaching around a few hundred centimeters per second. That is what it is, with laser combs and vacuum and things like that. Because our spectroscopic resolution will be doubled with TMT, because collecting area is an issue. It's not the issue with spectrographs, because these are high redshift objects, very faint, and we need to get signal to noise, typical signal to noise of 300. We have to reach 300 to 400. We are reaching 300 to 416.5 magnitude or 15th magnitude quasar after observing over 30 hours.
Oh, okay.
Whereas that will become trivial when we do with TMT. Within few hours, 8 hours, you will reach such a sensitivity. So that is the thing we have to.
So instead of just two epochs, it's as a matter of principle, it's easy to visualize that, but monitoring it continuously at regular intervals would also yield an accumulated, trend, which can actually help disentangle several other possible contaminants, which might lead to the difference, right?
Yeah. I think I didn't go into this. The most important thing is the quasar variability itself, because we are going to detect this in front of a spectrum of quasar, and we are looking at minute signals of velocity shifts, and such shifts can be introduced if you don't model the background accurately. So that is not needed for doing astrophysics, but for doing this, a small tilt in your incident spectrum can shift the wavelength slightly.
Yeah, right.
So that's why even if you don't do it with TMT, a small telescope monitoring will be a 2-meter telescope or 2 to 1 meter telescope. This, if you choose the 100 objects, it will be good to monitor them with a smaller telescope over a long period of time to understand the behavior of the background source. And any systematics related to that can be removed based on that.
Yeah, thanks.